Day 2, the ninth story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by J.C. Guan. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 2, the ninth story. Bernabo of Genoa, deceived by Ambrogiolo, loses his money and commands his innocent wife to be put to death. She escapes, habits herself as a man, and serves the Soldan. She discovers the deceiver, and brings Bernabo to Alexandria, where the deceiver is punished. She then resumes the garb of a woman, and with her husband returns wealthy to Genoa.
When Elisa had performed her part, and brought her touching story to a close, Queen Philomela, a damsel no less stately than fair of person, and of a surpassingly sweet and smiling mien, having composed herself to speak, thus began: Our engagements with Dioneo shall be faithfully observed, wherefore, as he and I alone remain to complete the day's narration, I will tell my story first, and he shall have the grace he craved, and be the last to speak. After which prelude she thus began her story.
'Tis a proverb current among the vulgar, that the deceived has the better of the deceiver, a proverb which, were it not exemplified by events, might hardly in any manner be justified. Wherefore, while adhering to our theme, I am minded, at the same time, dearest ladies, to show you that there is truth in this proverb, the proof whereof should be none the less welcome to you than it may put you on your guard against deceivers. Know then that certain very great merchants of Italy, being met, as merchants use, for divers reasons proper to each, at a hostelry in Paris, and having one evening jovially supped together, fell a talking of divers matters, and so, passing from one topic to another, they came at last to discuss the ladies whom they had left at home, and one jocosely said, I cannot answer for my wife, but for myself I own, that whenever a girl that is to my mind comes in my way, I give the go-by to the love that I bear my wife, and take my pleasure of the newcomer to the best of my power. And so do I, said another, because I know that, whether I suspect her or not, my wife tries her fortune, and so 'tis do as you are done by, the ass and the wall are quits. A third added his testimony to the same effect, and in short all seemed to concur in the opinion that the ladies they had left behind them were not likely to neglect their opportunities. When one, a Genoese, Bernabo Lomelin by name, dissociated himself from the rest, affirming that by a special grace of God he was blessed with a wife who was, perhaps, the most perfect paragon to be found in Italy of all the virtues proper to a lady, and in great measure to a knight or squire, inasmuch as she was fair, still quite young, handy, hardy, and clever beyond all other women in embroidery work and all other forms of ladies' handicraft. Moreover, so well-mannered, discreet, and sensible was she, that she was as fit to wait at a lord's table as any squire or manservant or such like, the best and most adroit that could be found. To which encomium he added that she knew how to manage a horse, fly a hawk, read, write, and cast up accounts better than as if she were a merchant, and after much more in the same strain of commendation, he came at length to the topic of their conversation, asseverating with an oath that 'twas not possible to find a woman more honest, more chaste than she. Nay, he verily believed that, if he remained from home for 10 years, or indeed for the rest of his days, she would never think of any of these casual amours with any other man. Among the merchants who thus gossiped was a young man, Ambrogiolo da Piacenza by name, who, when Bernabo thus concluded his eulogy of his wife, broke out into a mighty laugh, and asked him with a jeer whether he, of all men, had this privilege by a special patent of the emperor. Bernabo replied, somewhat angrily, that 'twas a boon conferred upon him by God, who was rather more powerful than the emperor. To which Ambrogiolo rejoined, I make no doubt, Bernabo, that thou believest what thou sayest is true, but methinks thou hast been but a careless observer of the nature of things. Otherwise I do not take thee to be of so gross understanding, but that thou must have discerned therein reasons for speaking more judiciously of this matter, and that thou mayst not think that we, who have spoken with much freedom about our wives, deem to be of another nature and mould than thine, but mayst know that we have but uttered what common sense dictates. I am minded to go a little further into this matter with thee. I have always understood that of all mortal beings created by God, man is the most noble, and next after him woman, man then being, as is universally believed, and is indeed apparent by his works, more perfect than woman, must without doubt be endowed with more firmness and constancy, women being one and all more mobile, for reasons not a few and founded in nature, which I might adduce, but mean for the present to pass over. And yet, for all his great firmness, man cannot withstand, I do not say a woman's supplications, but the mere lusts of the eye which she unwittingly excites, and that in such sort that he will do all that is in his power to induce her to pleasure him, not once perhaps in the course of a month, but 1,000 times a day. How then shouldst thou expect a woman mobile by nature to resist the supplications, the flatteries, the gifts, and all the other modes of attack that an accomplished seducer will employ? Thou thinkest that she may hold out. Nay, verily, affirm it as thou mayst, I doubt. Thou dost not really so think. Thou dost not deny that thy wife is a woman, a creature of flesh and blood like the rest, and if so, she must have the same cravings, the same natural propensities as they, and no more force to withstand them. Wherefore 'tis at least possible that, however honest she be, she will do as others do, and not that is possible admits such peremptory denial or affirmation of its contrary as this of thine. Whereto Bernabo returned, I am a merchant and no philosopher, and I will give thee a merchant's answer. I acknowledge that what thou sayest is true, of vain and foolish women who have no modesty, but such as are discreet are so sensitive in regard of their honour that they become better able to preserve it than men, who have no such solicitude, and my wife is one of this sort. Doubtless, observed Ambrogiolo, few would be found to indulge in these casual amours, if every time they did so a horn grew out on the brow to attest the fact, but not so much as a trace or vestige of a horn, so only they be but prudent, and the shame and dishonour consist only in the discovery. Wherefore, if they can do it secretly, they do it, or are forced to refrain. Hold it for certain that she alone is chaste, who either has never suits made to her, or suing herself, was repulsed. And albeit I know that for reasons true and founded in nature this must needs be, yet I should not speak so positively thereof as I do, had I not many a time, with many a woman, verified it by experience. And I assure thee that had I but access to this most saintly wife of thine, I should confidently expect very soon to have the same success with her as with others." Then Bernabo angrily, "'Twere long and tedious to continue this discussion. I should have my say, and thou thine, and in the end 'twould come to nothing. But as thou sayest that they are all so compliant, and that thou art so accomplished a seducer, I give thee this pledge of the honour of my wife. I consent to forfeit my head, if thou shouldst succeed in bringing her to pleasure thee in such a sort, and shouldst thou fail, thou shalt forfeit to me no more than 1,000 florins of gold." Elated by this unexpected offer, Ambrogiolo replied, "I know not what I should do with thy blood, Bernabo, if I won the wager. But if thou wouldst have proof of what I have told thee, lay 5,000 florins of gold, which must be worth less to thee than thy head, against 1,000 of mine, and whereas thou makest no stipulation as to time, I will bind myself to go to Genoa, and within 3 months from my departure hence to have had my pleasure of thy wife, and in witness thereof to bring back with me, of the things which she prizes most dearly, evidence of her compliance so weighty and conclusive that thou thyself shalt admit the fact. Nor do I require aught of thee but that thou pledge thy faith, neither to come to Genoa, nor to write word to her of this matter during the said 3 months." Bernabo professed himself well content, and though the rest of the company, seeing that the compact might well have very evil consequences, did all that they could to frustrate it, yet the 2 men were now so heated that, against the will of the others, they set it down fairly in writing, and signed it each with his own hand. This done, Ambrogiolo, leaving Bernabo at Paris, posted with all speed for Genoa. Arrived there, he set to work with great caution, and having found out the quarter in which the lady resided, he learned in the course of a few days enough about her habits of life and her character to know what Bernabo had told him was rather less than the truth. So, recognizing that his enterprise was hopeless, he cast about for some device whereby he might cover his defeat, and having got speech of a poor woman, who was much in the lady's house, as also in her favour, he bribed her, other means failing, to convey him in a chest, which he had made for the purpose, not only into the house, but into the bedroom of the lady, whom the good woman, following Ambrogiolo's instructions, induced to take charge of it for some days, during which she said she would be away. So the lady suffered the chest to remain in the room, and when the night was so far spent that Ambrogiolo thought she must be asleep, he opened it with some tools with which he had provided himself, and stole softly out. There was a light in the room, so that he was able to form an idea of its situation, to take note of the pictures and everything else of consequence that it contained, and to commit the whole to memory. This done, he approached the bed, and observing that the lady and a little girl that was with her were fast asleep, he gently uncovered her, and saw that nude she was not a whit less lovely than when dressed. He looked about for some mark that might serve him as evidence that he had seen her in this state, but found nothing except a mole, which she had under the left breast, and which was fringed with a few hairs that shone like gold. So beautiful was she that he was tempted, at the hazard of his life, to take his place by her side in the bed. But, remembering what he had heard of her inflexible obduracy in such affairs, he did not venture, but quietly replaced the bedclothes, and having passed the best part of the night very much at his ease in her room, he took from one of the lady's boxes a purse, a gown, a ring, and a girdle, and with these tokens returned to the chest, and locked himself in as before. In this manner he passed 2 nights, nor did the lady in the least suspect his presence. On the 3rd day the good woman came by, preconcert to fetch her chest, and took it back to the place whence she had brought it. So Ambrogiolo got out, paid her the stipulated sum, and hied him back with all speed to Paris, where he arrived within the appointed time. Then, in presence of the merchants who were witnesses of his altercation with Bernabeau, and the wager to which it had given occasion, he told Bernabeau that he had won the bet, having done what he had boasted that he would do. And in proof thereof, he first of all described the appearance of the room and the pictures, and then displayed the articles belonging to the lady which he had brought away with him, averring that she had given them to him. Bernabeau acknowledged the accuracy of his description of the room, and that the articles did really belong to his wife, but objected that Ambrogiolo might have learnt characteristic features of the room from one of the servants, and have come by the things in a similar way, and therefore, unless he had something more to say, he could not justly claim to have won the bet. "Verily," rejoined Ambrogiolo, "this should suffice, but as thou requirest that I say somewhat further, I will satisfy thee. I say, then, that Madame Ginevra, thy wife, has under her left breast a mole of some size, around which are perhaps 6 hairs of a golden hue." As Bernabeau heard this, it was as if a knife pierced his heart, so poignant was his suffering, and, though no word escaped him, the complete alteration of his mien bore unmistakable witness to the truth of Ambrogiolo's words. After a while he said, "Gentlemen, 'tis even as Ambrogiolo says. He has won the bet. He has but to come when he will, and he shall be paid." And so, the very next day, Ambrogiolo was paid in full, and Bernabeau, intent on wreaking vengeance on his wife, left Paris and set his face towards Genoa. He had no mind, however, to go home, and accordingly halted at an estate which he had some 20 miles from the city, whither he sent forward a servant, in whom he reposed much truth, with 2 horses and a letter advising the lady of his return, and bidding her come out to meet him. At the same time, he gave the servant secret instructions to choose some convenient place, and ruthlessly put the lady to death, and so returned to him. On his arrival at Genoa, the servant delivered his message and the letter to the lady, who received him with great cheer, and next morning got on horseback and set forth with him for her husband's estate. So they rode on, talking of divers matters, until they came to a deep gorge, very lonely, and shut in by high rocks and trees. The servant, deeming this just the place in which he might without risk of discovery fulfill his lord's behest, whipped out a knife, and seizing the lady by the arm, said, "Madam, commend your soul to God, for here must end at once your journey and your life." Terror-stricken by what she saw and heard, the lady cried out, "Mercy, for God's sake, before thou slay me! Tell me at least wherein I have wronged thee, that thou art thus minded to put me to death." "Madam," said the servant, "may you have in no wise wronged, but your husband, how you may have wronged him I know not, charged me shew you no mercy, but to slay thou on this journey, and threatened to have me hanged by the neck, should I not do so. You know well how bound I am to him, and that I may not disobey any of his commands. God knows I pity you, but yet I can no otherwise." Whereat the lady burst into tears, saying, "Mercy, for God's sake, make not thyself the murderer of one that has done thee no wrong, and at the behest of another. The all-seeing God knows that I never did aught to merit such requital at my husband's hands. But enough of this for the present. There is a way in which thou canst serve at once God and thy master and myself. If thou wilt do as I bid thee, take then these clothes of mine, and give me in exchange just thy doublet and a hood, and carry the clothes with thee to my lord and thine, and tell him that thou hast slain me, and I swear to thee by the life which I shall receive at thy hands, that I will get me gone, and there abide, whence news of me shall never reach either him or thee, or these parts. The servant, being loath to put her to death, soon yielded to pity, and so he took her clothes, allowing her to retain a little money that she had, and gave her one of his worsted doublets and a hood. Then, praying her to depart the country, he left her afoot in the gorge, and returned to his master, whom he gave to understand that he had not only carried out his orders, but had left the lady's body a prey to wolves. Bernabo, after a while, returned to Genoa, where the supposed murder being bruited abroad, he was severely censured. Alone and disconsolate, the lady, as night fell, disguised herself as best she could, and hied her to a neighbouring village, where, having procured what was needful from an old woman, she shortened her doublet and fitted it to her figure, converted her chemise into a pair of breeches, cut her hair close, and, in short, completely disguised herself as a sailor. She then made her way to the coast, where by chance she encountered a Catalan gentleman by name Segna and Carrach, who had landed from one of his ships, which lay in the offing, to recreate himself at Alba, where there was a fountain. So she made overture to him of her services, was engaged, and taken aboard the ship, assuming the name Sicurano da Finale. The gentleman put her in better trim as to clothes, and found her so apt and handy at service that he was exceedingly well pleased with her. Not long afterwards the Catalan sailed one of his carracks to Alexandria. He took with him some peregrine falcons, which he presented to the Soldan, who feasted him once or twice, and noting with approbation the behaviour of Sicurano, who always attended his master, he craved him of the Catalan, which request the Catalan reluctantly granted. Sicurano proved so apt for his new service that he was soon as high in grace and favour with the Soldan as he had been with the Catalan. Wherefore, when the time of year came at which there was wont to be held at Acre, then under the Soldan's sway, a great fair, much frequented by merchants, Christian and Saracen alike, and to which, for the security of the merchants and their goods, the Soldan always sent one of his great officers of state, with the other officers and a guard to attend upon him, he determined to send Sicurano, who by this time knew the language very well. So Sicurano was sent to Acre as governor and captain of the guard for the protection of the merchants and merchandise. Arrived there, he bestirred himself with great zeal in all matters appertaining to his office, and as he went his rounds of inspection, he espied among the merchants not a few from Italy, Sicilian, Pisans, Genoese, Venetians, and so forth, with whom he consorted the more readily because they reminded him of his native land. And so it befell that, alighting once at a shop belonging to some Venetian merchants, he saw there, among other trinkets, a purse and a girdle, which he forthwith recognized as having once been his own. Concealing his surprise, he blandly asked whose they were, and if they were for sale. He was answered by Ambrogiolo da Piacenza, who had come thither with much merchandise aboard a Venetian ship, and hearing that the captain of the guard was asking about the ownership of the purse and girdle, came forward, and said with a smile, "The things are mine, sir, and I am not disposed to sell them, but if they take your fancy, I would gladly give them to you." Observing the smile, Sicurano misdoubted that something had escaped him by which Ambrogiolo had recognized him, but he answered with a composed air, "Thou dost smile, perchance, to see me, a soldier, come asking about this woman's gear?" "Not so, sir," returned Ambrogiolo. "I smile to think of the manner in which I came by it." "And pray," said Sicurano, "if thou hast no reason to conceal it, tell me, in God's name, how thou didst come by the things." "Why, sir," said Ambrogiolo, They were given me by a Genoese lady, with whom I once spent a night, Madame Ginevra by name, wife of Barnabo Lomelin, who prayed me to keep them as a token of her love. I smiled just now to think of the folly of Barnabo, who was so mad as to stake 5,000 florins of gold against my 1,000, that I could not bring his wife to surrender to me, which I did. I won the bet, and he, who should rather have been punished for his insensate folly than she for doing what all women do, had her put to death, as I afterwards gathered, on his way back from Paris to Genoa. Ambrogiolo had not done speaking before Sicurano had discerned in him the evident cause of her husband's animosity against her, and all her woe, and had made up her mind that he should not escape with impunity. She therefore feigned to be much interested by this story, consorted frequently and very familiarly with Ambrogiolo, and insidiously captured his confidence, insomuch that at her suggestion, when the fair was done, he, taking with him all his ware, accompanied her to Alexandria, where she provided him with a shop, and put no little of her own money in his hands, so that he, finding it very profitable, was glad enough to stay. Anxious to make her innocence manifest to Barnabo, Sicurano did not rest until, with the help of some great Genoese merchants that were in Alexandria, she had devised an expedient to draw him thither. Her plan succeeded. Barnabo arrived, and as he was now very poor, she privately arranged that he should be entertained by one of her friends, until occasion should serve to carry out her design. She had already introduced Ambrogiolo to tell his story to the Soldan, and the Soldan to interest himself in the matter. So Barnabo being come, and further delay inexpedient, she seized her opportunity, and persuaded the Soldan to cite Ambrogiolo and Barnabo before him, that in Barnabo's presence Ambrogiolo might be examined of his boast touching Barnabo's wife, and the truth thereof, if not to be had from him by gentle means, be elicited by torture. So the Soldan, having Ambrogiolo and Barnabo before him, amid a great concourse of the people, questioned Ambrogiolo of the 5,000 florins of gold that he had won from Barnabo, and sternly bade him tell the truth. Still more harsh was the aspect of Sicurano, in whom Ambrogiolo had placed his chief reliance, but who now threatened him with the direst torments if the truth were not forthcoming. Thus hard-bested on this side and on that, and in a manner coerced, Ambrogiolo, thinking he had but to refund, in presence of Barnabo and many others, accurately recounted the affair as it had happened. When he had done, Sicurano, as minister of the Soldan for the time being, turned to Barnabo and said, "And thy wife, thus falsely accused, what treatment did she meet with at thy hands?" "Mortified," said Barnabo, "by the loss of my money, and the dishonor which I deemed to have been done me by my wife, I was so overcome by wrath that I had her put to death by one of my servants, who brought me word that her corpse had been instantly devoured by a pack of wolves." Albeit the Soldan had heard and understood all that had passed, yet he did not as yet apprehend the object for which Sicurano had pursued the investigation. Wherefore Sicurano thus addressed him: "My lord, what cause this good lady has to boast of her lover and her husband, you have now abundant means of judging, seeing that the lover at one and the same time despoils her of her honor, blasting her fair fame with slanderous accusations, and ruins her husband, who, more prompt to trust the falsehood of another than the verity of which his own long experience should have assured him, devotes her to death and the devouring wolves. And moreover, such is the regard, such the love which both bear her, that, though both tarry a long time with her, neither recognizes her. However, that you may know full well what chastisements they have severely deserved, I will now cause her to appear in your presence and theirs, provided you, of your especial grace, be pleased to punish the deceiver and pardon the deceived." The Soldan, being minded in this manner to defer entirely to Sicurano, answered that he was well content, and bare produced the lady. Bernabo, who had firmly believed that she was dead, was lost in wonder, likewise Ambrogiolo, who now divined his evil plight, and dreading something worse than the disbursement of money, knew not whether to expect the lady's advent with fear or with hope. His suspense was not of long duration, for, as soon as the Soldan signified his assent, Sicurano, weeping, threw herself on her knees at his feet, and discarding the tones, as she would fair have divested herself of the outward semblance of a man, said, "My lord, that forlorn hapless Ginevra am I, falsely and foully slandered by this traitor Ambrogiolo, and by my cruel and unjust husband, deceived over to her servant to slaughter and cast out as prey to the wolves, for which cause I have now for 6 years been a wanderer on the face of the earth in the guise of a man." Then, rending her robes in front and baring her breast, she made it manifest to the Soldan and all others who were present that she was indeed a woman. Then turning to Ambrogiolo, she haughtily challenged him to say when she had ever lain with him, as he had boasted. Ambrogiolo said never a word, for he now recognized her, and it was as if shame had reft from him the power of speech. The Soldan, who had never doubted that Sicurano was a man, was so wonderstruck by what he saw and heard that at times he thought it must all be a dream. But as wonder gave place to conviction of the truth, he extolled in the amplest terms the constancy and virtue and seemliness with which Ginevra, erstwhile Sicurano, had ordered her life. He then directed that she should be most nobly arrayed in the garb of her sex, and surrounded by a bevy of ladies. Mindful of her intercession, he granted to Bernabo the life which he had forfeited, and she, when Bernabo threw himself at her feet and wept and craved her pardon, raised him, unworthy though he was, to his feet, and generously forgave him, and tenderly embraced him as her husband. Ambrogiolo the Soldan commanded to be bound to a stake, that his bare flesh, anointed with honey, might be exposed with the sun on one of the heights of the city, there to remain until it should fall to pieces of its own accord, and so 'twas done. He then decreed that the lady should have the traitor's estate, which was worth not less but rather more than 10,000 doubloons, whereto he added, in jewels and vessels of gold and silver and in money, the equivalent of upwards of other 10,000 doubloons, having first entertained her and her husband with most magnificent and ceremonious cheer, accordant with the lady's worth, which done, he placed his ship at her disposal, and gave them leave to return to Genoa at their pleasure. So to Genoa they returned very rich and happy, and were received with all honor, especially Madame Ginevra, whom all the citizens had believed to be dead, and whom thenceforth, so long as she lived, they held of great consequence and excellency. As for Ambrogiolo, the very same day that he was bound to the stake, the honey with which his body was anointed attracted such swarms of flies, wasps, and gadflies, wherewith that country abounds, that not only was his life sucked from him, but his very bones were completely denuded of flesh, in which state, hanging by the sinews, they remained a long time undisturbed, for a sign and a testimony of his baseness to all that passed by, and so the deceived had the better of the deceiver. End of Day 2, the 9th story.
Day 2, the 10th story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For further information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. AudioBooks.org. Reading by Andy Minter. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 2. The 10th story. Paganino da Monaco carries off the wife of Messer Ricciardo de Cinzica, who, having learned where she is, goes to Paganino and in a friendly manner asks him to restore her. He consents, providing she be willing. She refuses to go back with her husband. Messer Ricciardo dies, and she marries Paganino.
Their queen's story, by its beauty, elicited hearty commendation from all the honorable company, and most especially from Dioneo, with whom it now rested to conclude the day's narration. Again and again he renewed his elegy of the queen's story, and then began on this wise.
Fair ladies, there is that in the Queen's story which has caused me to change my purpose, and substitute another story for that which I had meant to tell. I refer to the insensate folly of Baraballo, well though it was with him in the end, and of all others who delude themselves, as he seemed to do, with the vain imagination that, while they go about the world taking their pleasure now of this, now of the other woman, their wives, left at home, suffer not their hands to stray from their girdles, as if we, who are born of them and bred among them, could be ignorant of the bent of their desires. Wherefore, by my story, I propose at one and the same time to show you how great is the folly of all such, and how much greater is the folly of those who, deeming themselves mightier than nature, think by sophistical arguments to bring that to pass which is beyond their power, and strive might and main to conform others to their own pattern, however little the nature of the latter may brook such treatment. Know then that there was in Pisa a judge, better endowed with mental than with physical vigour, by name Messer Ricciardo de Cinzica, who, being minded to take a wife, and thinking perhaps to satisfy her by the same resources which served him for his studies, was to be suited with none that had not both youth and beauty, qualities which he would rather have eschewed if he had known how to give himself as good counsel as he gave to others. However, being very rich, he had his desire. Messer Lotto Giolandi gave him in marriage one of his daughters, Bartolomea by name, a maid as fair and fit for amorous dalliance as any in Pisa, though few maids be there that do not show as spotted lizards. The judge brought her home with all pomp and ceremony, and had a brave and lordly wedding. But in the essay which he made the very first night to serve her, so as to consummate the marriage, he made a false move, and drew the game much to his own disadvantage, for next morning his lean, withered, and scarce animate frame was only to be requickened by draughts of vernacular, artificial restoratives, and the like remedies. So, taking a more sober estimate of his powers than he had been wont, the worthy judge began to give his wife lessons from a calendar which might have served as a horn book, and perhaps had been put together at Ravenna, inasmuch as, according to his showing, there was not a day in the year but was sacred, not to one saint only, but to many, in honour of whom, for divers reasons, it behoved men and women to abstain from carnal intercourse. Whereto he added fast days, ember days, vigils of apostles and other saints, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the whole of Lent, certain lunar mansions, and many other exceptions, arguing perchance that the practice of men with women abed should have its times of vacation no less than the administration of the law. In this method, which caused the lady grievous dumps, he long persisted, hardly touching her once a month, and observing her closely, lest another should give her to know working days, as he had taught her holidays. Now it so befell that one hot season Messer Ricciardo thought he would like to visit a very beautiful estate which he had near Montenero, there to take the air and recreate himself for some days, and thither accordingly he went with his fair lady. While there, to amuse her, he arranged for a day's fishing, and so he in one boat with the fisherman, and she in another with other ladies, they put out to watch the sport, which they found so delightsome that almost before they knew where they were some miles out to sea. And while they were thus engrossed with the sport, a galliot of Paganino de Mare, a very famous corsair of those days, hove in sight and bore down upon the boats, and for all the speed they made, came up with that in which were the ladies. And on sight of the fair lady, Paganino, regardless of all else, bore her off to his galliot, before the very eyes of Messer Ricciardo, who was by this time ashore, and forthwith was gone. The chagrin of the judge, who was jealous of the very air, may readily be imagined, but 'twas to no purpose that both at Pisa and elsewhere he moaned and groaned over the wickedness of the corsairs, for he knew neither by whom his wife had been abducted, nor whither she had been taken. Paganino, meanwhile, deemed himself lucky to have gotten so beautiful a prize, and being unmarried, he was minded never to part with her, and addressed himself by soft words to soothe the sorrow which kept her in a flood of tears. Finding words of little avail, he at night passed, the more readily that the calendar had slipped from his girdle and all feasts and holidays from his mind, to acts of love, and on this wise administered consolation so effective that before they were come to Monaco she had completely forgotten the judge and his canons, and had begun to live with Paganino as merrily as might be. So he brought her to Monaco, where, besides the daily and the nightly solace which he gave her, he honourably entreated her as his wife. Not long afterwards, Messer Ricciardo, coming to know where his wife was, and being most ardently desirous to have her back, and thinking none but he would understand exactly what to do in the circumstances, determined to go and fetch her himself, being prepared to spend any sum of money that might be demanded by way of ransom. So he took ship, and being come to Monaco, he both saw her and was seen by her, which news she communicated to Paganino in the evening, and told him how she was minded to behave. Next morning, Messer Ricciardo, encountering Paganino, made up to him, and soon assumed a very familiar and friendly air, while Paganino pretended not to know him, being on his guard to see what he would be at. So Messer Ricciardo, as soon as he deemed the time ripe, as best and most delicately he was able, disclosed to Paganino the business on which he had come, praying him to take whatever in the way of ransom he chose, and restore him the lady. Paganino replied cheerily, "Right glad I am to see you here, sir, and briefly thus I answer you. True it is that I have here a young woman, whether she be your wife or another man's I know not, for you are none of my acquaintance, nor is she, except for the short time that she has been with me. If, as you say, you are her husband, why, as you seem to me to be a pleasant gentleman, I will even take you to her, and I doubt not she will know you well. If she says that it is even as you say, and is minded to go with you, you shall give me just what you like by way of ransom, so pleasant have I found you. Otherwise 'twill be churlish in you to think of taking her from me, who am a young man, and as fit to keep a woman as another, and moreover never knew any woman so agreeable." "My wife," said Ricciardo, "she is, beyond all manner of doubt, as you shall see, for as soon as thou bringest me to her, she will throw her arms about my neck. Wherefore, as thou art minded, even so be it. I ask no more." "Go we then," said Paganino, and forthwith they went into the house, and Paganino sent for the lady, while they waited in one of the halls. By and by she entered from one of the adjoining rooms, all trim and tricked out, and advanced to the place where Paganino and Messer Ricciardo were standing. But never a word did she vouchsafe to her husband, any more than if he had been some stranger whom Paganino had brought into the house. Whereat the judge was mightily amazed, having expected to be greeted by her with the heartiest of cheer, and began to ruminate thus: "Perhaps I am so changed by the melancholy and prolonged heartache to which I have been a prey since I lost her, that she does not recognize me." Wherefore he said, "Madam, cause enough have I to rue it that I took thee a fishing, for never yet was known such grief as has been mine since I lost thee,
and now it seems as if thou dost not recognize me, so scant of courtesy is thy greeting. Seest thou not that I am thy Messer Ricciardo, come hither prepared to pay whatever this gentleman in whose house we are may demand, that I may have thee back and take thee away with me? And he is so good as to surrender thee on my own terms." The lady turned to him with a slight smile, and said, "Is it to me you speak, sir? Bethink you that you may have mistaken me for another, for I, for my part, do not remember ever to have seen you." "Nay," said Messer Ricciardo, "but bethink thee what thou sayest. Scan me closely, and if thou wilt but search thy memory, thou wilt find that I am thy Ricciardo de Cinzica." "Your pardon, sir," answered the lady. "'Tis not, perhaps, as seemly for me as you imagine to gaze long upon you, but I have gazed long enough to know that I never saw you before." Messer Ricciardo supposed that she so spoke for fear of Paganino, in whose presence she durst not acknowledge that she knew him. So, after a while, he craved as a favour of Paganino that he might speak with her in a room alone; which request Paganino granted, so only that he did not kiss her against her will. He then bade the lady go with Messer Ricciardo into a room apart, and hear what he had to say, and give him such answer as she deemed meet. So the lady and Messer Ricciardo went together into a room alone, and sat down, and Messer Ricciardo began on this wise: "Ah, dear heart of me, sweet soul of me, hope of me, dost not recognize thy Ricciardo that loves thee better than himself? How comes it thus to pass? Am I so changed? Ah, goodly eye of me, do but look on me a little." Whereat the lady burst into a laugh, and interrupting him, said, "Rest assured that my memory is not so short but that I know you for what you are, my husband, Messer Ricciardo de Cinzica; but far enough you showed yourself to be while I was with you from knowing me for what I was, young, lusty, lively, which, had you been the wise man you would fain be reputed, you would not have ignored, nor by consequence that which, besides food and clothing, it behoves men to give young ladies, albeit for shame they demanded not, which in what sort you gave you know. You should not have taken a wife if she was to be less to you than the study of the law, albeit 'twas never as a judge that I regarded you, but rather as a bellman of Incenia and saints' days, so well you knew them all, and fasts and vigils. And I tell you that, had you imposed the observance of as many saints' days on the labourers that till your lands as on yourself, who had but my little plot to till, you would never have harvested a single grain of corn. God, in his mercy, having regard unto my youth, has caused me to fall in with this gentleman, with whom I am much closeted in this room, where naught is known of feasts, such feasts, I mean, as you, more devoted to the service of God than to the service of ladies, were wont to observe in such profusion. Nor was this threshold ever crossed by Saturday or Friday, or vigil, or Ember days, or Lent, that is so long. Rather, here we are at work day and night, threshing the wool, and well I know how featly it went when the matin bell last sounded. Wherefore with him I mean to stay, and to work while I am young, and postpone the observance of feasts and times of indulgence and fasts until I am old. So get you hence, and good luck go with you, but depart with what speed you may, and observe as many feasts as you like, so I be not with you." The pain with which Messer Ricciardo followed this outburst was more than he could bear, and when she had done, he exclaimed, "Ah, sweet soul of me, what words are these that thou utterest? Hast thou no care for thy parents' honour and thine own? Wilt thou remain here to be this man's harlot, and to live in mortal sin rather than live with me at Pisa as my wife? Why, when he is tired of thee, he will cast thee out to thy most grievous dishonour. I will ever cherish thee, and ever, willy nilly, thou wilt be the mistress of my house. Wouldst thou, to gratify this unbridled and unseemly passion, part at once with thy honour and with me, who love thee more dearly than my very life? Ah, cherished hope of me, say not so again. Make up thy mind to come with me. As I now know thy bent, I will henceforth constrain myself to pleasure thee. Wherefore, sweet my treasure, think better of it, and come with me, who have never known a happy hour since thou wert reft from me." The lady answered, "I expect not, nor is it possible that another should be more tender of my honour than I am myself. Were my parents so when they gave me to you? I trow not, nor mean I to be more tender of their honour now than they were then of mine. And if now I live in mortar sin, I will ever abide there until it be pestle sin. Concern yourself no further on my account. Moreover, let me tell you that whereas at Pisa 'twas as if I were your harlot, seeing that the planets in conjunction, according to lunar mansion and geometric square, intervene between you and me, here with Paganino I deem myself a wife, for he holds me in his arms all night long, and hugs and bites me, and how he serves me, God be my witness. Ah, but you say you will constrain yourself to serve me. To what end? To do it on the third essay, and raise it by a stroke of baton? I doubt not you are become a perfect knight since I last saw you. Begone, and constrain yourself to live, for here, methinks, your tenure is but precarious, so hectic and wasted is your appearance. Nay, more, I tell you this, that should Paganino desert me, which he does not seem disposed to do so long as I am willing to stay with him, never will I return to your house, where for one while I stayed to my most grievous loss and prejudice, but will seek my commodity elsewhere than with one from whose whole body I could not wring a single cupful of sap. So again I tell you that here is neither feast nor vigil, wherefore here I mean to abide. And you, get you gone in God's name with what speed you may, lest I raise the cry that you threaten to violate me." Messer Ricciardo felt himself hard bested, but he could not but recognise that, worn out as he was, he had been foolish to take a young wife. So, sad and woebegone, he quitted the room, and after expending on Paganino a wealth of words which signified nothing, he at last gave up his bootless enterprise, and leaving the lady to her own devices, returned to Pisa, where, for very grief, he lapsed into such utter imbecility that when he was met by any with greeting or question in the street, he made no other answer than "The evil hole brooks no holiday," and soon afterwards died. Which, when Paganino learned, being well assured of the love the lady bore him, he made her his lawful wife. And so, keeping neither feast, nor vigil, nor Lent, they worked as hard as their legs permitted, and had a good time. Wherefore, dear my ladies, I am of opinion that Messer Barnabo, in his altercation with Ambrogiolo, rode the goat downhill. End of Day 2, the 10th story.
Conclusion of the second day of Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Translated by H. M. Rigg. Second day. The conclusion. This story provoked so much laughter that the jaws of every one in the company ached, and all the ladies by common consent acknowledged that Dioneo was right, and pronounced Bernabo a blockhead. But when the story was ended and the laughter had subsided, the queen, observing that the hour was now late, and that with the completion of the day's story-telling the end of her sovereignty was come, followed the example of her predecessor, and took off her wreath and set it on Neiphile's brow, saying with gladsome mien, "Now, dear gossip, thine be the sovereignty of this little people." And so she resumed her seat. Neiphilu coloured somewhat to receive such honour, shewing of aspect even as the fresh-blown rose of April or May in the radiance of the dawn, her eyes rather downcast, and glowing with love's fire, like the morning star. But when the respectful murmur, by which the rest of the company gave blithe token of the favour in which they held their queen, was hushed, and her courage revived, she raised herself somewhat more in her seat than she was wont, and thus spoke: "As so it is that I am your queen, I purpose not to depart from the usage observed by my predecessors, whose rule had commanded not only your obedience but your approbation. I will therefore in few words explain to you the course which, if it commend itself to your wisdom, we will follow. Tomorrow, you know, is Friday, and the next day Saturday, days which most folk find somewhat wearisome, by reason of the viands which are then customary, to say nothing of the reverence in which Friday is meet to be held, seeing that it was on that day that he who died for us bore his passion. Wherefore it would be in my judgment both right and very seemly, in honour of God, with unbade story-telling give place to prayer. On Saturday ladies are wont to wash the head, and rid their persons of whatever of dust or other soilure they may have gathered by the labours of the past week. Not a few, likewise, are wont to practise abstinence for devotion to the Virgin Mother of the Son of God, and to honour the approaching Sunday by an entire surcease from work. Wherefore, as we cannot then completely carry out our plan of life, we shall, I think, do well to intermit our story-telling on that day also. We shall then have been here 4 days. At least, we should be surprised by newcomers. I deem it expedient that we shift our quarters, and I have already taken thought for our next place of sojourn. Where being arrived on Sunday, we will assemble after our sleep, and whereas to-day our discourse has had an ample field to range in, I propose, both because you will thereby have more time for thought, and it will be best to set some limits to the licence of our story-telling, that of the many diversities of Fortune's handiwork, we make one our theme, whereof I have also made choice, to wit, the luck of such as have painfully acquired some much coveted thing, or having lost, have recovered it. Whereon let each meditate some matter, which to tell may be profitable, or at least delectable to the company, saving always Dioneo's privilege." All applauded the queen's speech and plan, to which, therefore, it was decided to give effect. Thereupon the queen called her seneschal, told him where to place the tables that evening, and then explained to him all that he had to do during the time of her sovereignty. This done, she rose with her train, and gave leave to all to take their pleasure as to each might seem best. So the ladies and the men hied them away to a little garden, where they diverted themselves a while. Then supper-time being come, they supped with all gay and festal cheer. When they were risen from the table, Emilia, at the queen's command, led the dance, while Pampinea, the other ladies responding, sang the ensuing song.
Shall any lady sing, if I not sing? I, to whom love did full contentment bring. Come hither, love, thou cause of all my joy, of all my hope, and all its sequel blest, and with me tune the lay. No more to sighs and bitter past annoy, that now but serve to lend thy bliss more zest. But to that fire's clear ray, wherewith enwrapped I blithely live and gay, thee as my God for ever worshipping. 'Twas thou, O love, didst set before mine eyes, when first thy fire my soul did penetrate, a youth to be my fair, so fit for deeds of high emprise, that ne'er another shall be found more great. Nay, nor I ween his peer, Such flame he kindled that my heart's full cheer I now pour out in chant with thee, my king. And that wherein I most delight is this, that as I love him, so he loveth me. So thank thee, love, I must, for whatsoever this world can yield of bliss is mine, and in the next at peace to be, I hope through that full trust I place in him. And thou, O God, thou dost it see, wilt grant of joy thy plenishing.
Some other songs and dances followed, to the accompaniment of divers sorts of music, after which, the queen deeming it time to go to rest, all, following in the wake of the torches, sought their several chambers. The next 2 days they devoted to the duties to which the queen had averted, looking forward to the Sunday with eager expectancy. End of second day. Third day. Introduction of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio. Third day. Introduction. Endeth here the second day of the Decameron, beginneth the third, in which under the rule of Fiesole discourse is had of the fortune of such as have painfully acquired some much coveted thing, or having lost have recovered it. The dawn of Sunday was already changing from vermilion to orange, as the sun hasted to the horizon, when the queen rose and roused all the company. The seneschal had early sent forward to their next place of sojourn ample store of things meet with folk to make all things ready, and now seeing the queen on the road, and the decampment as it were begun, he hastily collected the equipment of the baggage train, and set off therewith, attended by the rest of the servants, in rear of the ladies and gentlemen. So to the chant of, perhaps, a score of nightingales and other birds, the queen, her ladies, and the 3 young men, trooping beside or after her, paced leisurely westward by a path little frequented and overgrown with herbage and flowers, which, as they caught the sunlight, began one and all to unfold their petals. So fared she on with their train, while the kirk and the jest and the laugh passed from mouth to mouth, nor had they completed more than 2,000 paces, when, well before half tears, they arrived at the palace, most fair and sumptuous, which stood out somewhat from the plain, being situate upon a low eminence. On entering, they first traversed its great halls and dainty chambers, furnished throughout with all brave and meet appointments, and finding all most commendable, they reputed its lord a magnifico. Then descending, they surveyed its spacious and cheerful court, its vaults of excellent wines and copious springs of most cool water, and found it still more commendable. After which, being fain of rest, they sat them down in a gallery which commanded the court, and was close embosked with leafage and such flowers as the season afforded. And thither the discreet seneschal brought comfits and wines, most choice and excellent, wherewith they were refreshed. Whereupon they hied them to a walled garden adjoining the palace, which, the gate being opened, they entered, and wonder-struck by the beauty of the whole, passed on to examine more attentively the several parts. It was bordered and traversed in many parts by alleys, each very wide and straight as an arrow, and roofed in with trellis of vines, which gave good promise of bearing clusters that year, and being all in flower, dispersed such fragrance throughout the garden, as blended with that exhaled by many another plant that grew therein, made the garden seem redolent for all the spices that ever grew in the east. The sides of the alleys were all, as it were, walled in with roses, white and red and jasmine, insomuch that there was no part of the garden but one might walk there not merely in the morning, but at high noon in grateful shade and fragrance, completely screened from the sun. As for the plants that were in the garden, it were long to enumerate them, to specify their sorts, to describe the order of their arrangement. Enough, in brief, that there was abundance of every rarer species that our climate allows. In the middle of the garden, a thing no less but much more to be commended than aught else, was a lawn of the finest turf, and so green that it seemed almost black, pranked with flowers of perhaps 1,000 sorts, and girt about with the richest living verdure of orange trees and cedars, which shewed not only flowers but fruits, both new and old, and were no less grateful to the smell by their fragrance than to the eye by their shade. In the middle of the lawn was a basin of whitest marble, graven with marvellous art, in the centre whereof, whether the spring were natural or artificial I know not, rose a column supporting a figure, which sent forth a jet of water of such volume and to such an altitude, that it fell, not without a delicious splash, into the basin in quantity amply sufficient to turn a mill-wheel. The overflow was carried away from the lawn by a hidden conduit, and then, re-emerging, was distributed through tiny channels, very fair and cunningly contrived, in such sort as to flow round the entire lawn, and by similar derivative channels to penetrate almost every part of the fair garden, until, reuniting at a certain point, it issued thence, and clear as crystal slid down towards the plain, turning by the way 2 mill-wheels with extreme velocity, to the no small profit of the lord. The aspect of this garden, its fair order, the plants and the fountain of the rivulets that followed from it, so charmed the ladies and the 3 young men, that with one accord they affirmed that they knew not how it could receive any accession of beauty, or what other form could be given to paradise, if it were to be planted on earth. So excellently well pleased, they roved about it, plucking sprays from the trees and weaving them into the fairest of garlands, while songsters of perhaps 100 of different sorts warbled as if in mutual emulation, when suddenly a sight as fair and delightsome as novel, which, engrossed by the other beauties of the place, they had hitherto overlooked, met their eyes. For the garden, they now saw, was peopled with a host of living creatures, fair and of perhaps 100 sorts, and they pointed out to one another how here emerged a coney, or there scampered a hare, or couched a goat, or grazed a fawn, or many another harmless, all but domesticated, creature rode carelessly, seeking his pleasure at his own sweet will, all which served immensely to reinforce their already abundant delight. At length, however, they had enough of wandering about the garden and observing this thing and that, wherefore they repaired to the beautiful fountain, around which were ranged the tables, and there, after they had sung 6 songs and trod some measures, they sat them down, at the Queen's command, to breakfast, which was served with all celerity and in fair and orderly manner, the viands being both good and delicate, whereby their spirits rose, and up they got, and betook themselves again to music and song and dance, and so sped the hours, until, as the heat increased, the Queen deemed it time that whoso was so minded should go to sleep. Some there were that did so, others were too charmed by the beauty of the place to think of leaving it, but tarried there, and while the rest slept, amused themselves with reading romances or playing at chess or dice. However, after noon, there was a general levee, and, with faces laved and refreshed with cold water, they gathered by the Queen's command upon the lawn, and having sat them down in their wonted order by the fountain, waited for the story-telling to begin upon the theme assigned by the Queen. With this duty the Queen first charged Philostrato, who began on this wise. End of introduction of the 3rd day.
Day 3, the first story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J. M. Rigg. Day 3, the first story. Maceto de Lamporecchio feigns to be dumb, and obtains a gardener's place at a convent of women, who with one accord make haste to lie with him. Fairest ladies, not a few there are, both men and women, who are so foolish as blindly believe that, so soon as a young woman has been veiled in white and cowled in black, she ceases to be a woman, and is no more subject to the cravings proper to her sex, than if, in assuming the garb and profession of a nun, she had put on the nature of a stone. And if, perchance, they hear of aught that is counter to this their faith, they are no less vehement in their censure than if some most heinous and unnatural crime had been committed, neither bethinking of themselves, whom unrestricted liberty avails not to satisfy, nor making due allowance for the prepotent forces of idleness and solitude. And likewise not a few there are that blindly believe that, what with the hoe and the spade, and coarse fare and hardship, the carnal propensities are utterly eradicated from the tillers of the soil, and therewith all nimbleness of wit and understanding. But how gross is the error of such as suppose, I, on whom the queen has laid her commands, am minded, without deviating from the theme prescribed by her, to make manifest to you a little story. In this very countryside of ours there was, and yet is, a convent of women of great repute for sanctity. Name it I will not, lest I should in some measure diminish its repute, the nuns being at the time of which I speak but 9 in number, including the abbess and all young women. Their very beautiful garden was in the charge of a foolish fellow, who, not being content with his wage, squared accounts with their steward, and hied him back to Lamporecchio, whence he came. Among others who welcomed him home was a young husbandman, Maceto by name, a stout and hearty fellow, and handsome for a contadino, who asked him where he had been so long. Nuto, as our good friend was called, told him. Maceto then asked how he had been employed at the convent, and Nuto answered, I kept their large and beautiful garden in good trim, and besides I sometimes went to the wood to fetch the faggots. I drew water, and did some other trifling services. But they are the one and all possessed of the devil, for 'tis impossible to do anything to their mind, indeed, when I would be at work in the kitchen garden. Put this here, one would say, put that here, another would say, and a third would snatch the hoe from my hand, and say, that is not as it should be. And they would worry me until I would give up working, and go out of the garden, so that, with this thing and that, I was minded to stay there no more, and so I am come hither. The steward asked me before I left to send him any one, whom on my return I might find fit for the work, and I promised, but God bless his loins, I shall be at no pains to find out, and send him any one. As Nuto thus ran on, Maceto was seized by such a desire to be with these nuns that he quite pined, as he gathered from what Nuto said that his desire might be gratified. And as that could not be, if he said nothing to Nuto, he remarked, Ah, 'twas well done of thee to come hither. A man to live with women, he might as well live with so many devils. 6 times out of 7 they know not themselves what they want. There the conversation ended, but Maceto began to cast about how he should proceed to get permission to live with them. He knew that he was quite competent for the services of which Nuto spoke, and had therefore no fear of failing on that score, but he doubted he should not be received, because he was too young and well favoured. So, after much pondering, he fell into the following train of thought. The place is a long way off, and no one there knows me. If I make believe that I am dumb, doubtless I shall be admitted. Whereupon he made his mind up, laid a hatchet across his shoulder, and saying not a word to any of his destination, set forth, intending to present himself at the convent in the character of a destitute man. Arrived there, he had no sooner entered than he chanced to encounter the steward in the courtyard, and making signs to him as dumb folk do, he let him know that of his charity he craved something to eat, and that, if need were, he would split firewood. The steward promptly gave him to eat, and then set before him some logs which Nuto had not been able to split, all of which Maceto, who was very strong, split in a very short time. The steward, having occasion to go to the wood, took him with him, and there set him at work on the lopping, which done he placed the ass in front of him, and by signs made him understand that he was taking the loggings back to the convent. He did this so well that the steward kept him for some days to do one or two odd jobs, whereby it so befell that one day the abbess saw him, and asked the steward who he was. "Madam," replied the steward, "'tis a poor deaf mute that came here a day or two ago, craving alms, and so I have treated him kindly, and have let him make himself useful in many ways. If he knew how to do the work of the kitchen garden, and would stay with us, I doubt not we should be well served, for we have need of him, and he is strong, and would be able for whatever he might turn his hand to. Besides which, you have no cause to be apprehensive lest he should be cracking his jokes with your young women." "As I trust in God," said the abbess, "thou sayest sooth. Find out if he can do the garden work, and if he can, do all thou canst do to keep him with us. Give him a pair of shoes, an old hood, and speak him well. Make much of him, and let him be well fed." All of which the steward promised to do. Maceto meanwhile was close at hand, making as if he were sweeping the courtyard, and heard all that passed between the abbess and the steward, whereat he gleefully communed with himself on this wise: "Put me once within there, and you will see that I will do the work of the kitchen garden as it was never done before." So the steward set him to work in the kitchen garden, and finding that he knew his business excellently well, made signs to him to know whether he would stay, and he made answer by signs that he was ready to do whatever the steward wished. The steward then signified that he was engaged, told him to take charge of the kitchen garden, and showed him what he had to do there. Then, having other matters to attend to, he went away and left him there. Now, as Macedo worked there day by day, the nuns began to tease him and make him their butt, as it commonly happens that folk serve the dumb, and use bad language to him, the worst they could think of, supposing that he could not understand them. All of which passed scarce heeded by the abbess, who perhaps deemed him as destitute of virility as of speech. Now it so befell that after a hard day's work he was taking a little rest, when two young nuns, who were walking in the garden, approached the spot where he lay, and stopped to look at him while he pretended to be asleep. And so the bolder of the two said to the other, "If I thought thou wouldest keep it the secret, I would tell thee what I have sometimes meditated, and which thou perhaps mightest also find agreeable." The other replied, "Speak thy mind freely, and be sure that I will never tell a soul." Whereupon the bold one began again, "I know not if thou hast ever considered how close we are kept here, and that within these precincts dare never enter any man, unless it be the old steward, or this mute. And I have often heard from ladies that have come hither, that all the other sweets that the world has to offer signify not a jot in comparison of the pleasure that a woman has in connection with a man. Whereof I have more than once been minded to make an experiment with this mute, no other man being available. Nor indeed can anyone find any man in the whole world so meet therefore, seeing that he could not blab if he would. Thou seest that he is but a dull clownish lad, whose size has increased out of all proportion to his sense. Wherefore I would fain hear what thou wouldest have to say to it." "Alas," said the other, "what is't thou sayest? Knowest thou not that we have vowed our virginity to God?" "Oh," rejoined the first, "think but how many vows are made to him all day long, and never a one performed. And so for our vow let him find another, or others to perform it." "But," said her companion, "suppose that we conceived, how then?" "Nay, but," protested the first, "thou goest about to imagine evil before it befalls thee. Time enough to think of that when it comes to pass. There will be 1,000 ways to prevent it ever being known, so only we do not publish it ourselves." Thus reassured, the other was now the more eager of the two to test the quality of the male human animal. "Well then," she said, "how shall we go about it?" And was answered, "Thou seest 'tis past none. I make no doubt but all the sisters are asleep, except ourselves. Search we through the kitchen garden to see if there be any there, and if there be none, we have but to take him by the hand and lead him hither to the hut where he takes shelter from the rain. And then one shall mount guard, while the other has him with her inside. He is such a simpleton that he will do just whatever we bid him." No word of this conversation escaped Maceto, who, being disposed to obey, hoped for nothing so much as that one of them should take him by the hand. They meanwhile looked carefully all about them, and satisfied themselves that they were secure from observation. Then she that had broached the subject came close up to Maceto and shook him, whereupon he started to his feet. So she took him by the hand with a blandishing air, to which he replied with some clownish grins, and then she led him into the hut, where he needed no pressing to do what she desired of him, which done, she changed places with the other, as loyal comradeship required, and Maceto, still keeping up the pretence of simplicity, did their pleasure. Wherefore, before they left, each must needs make another essay of the mute's powers of writing, and afterwards, taking the matter over many times, they agreed that it was in truth not less, but even more delightful than they had been given to understand. And so, as they found convenient opportunity, they continued to go and disport themselves with the mute. Now it so chanced that one of their gossips, looking out of the window of her cell, saw what they did, and imparted it to two others. The three held counsel together, whether they should not denounce the offenders to the abbess, but soon changed their mind, and came to an understanding with them, whereby they became partners in Maceto. And in the course of time, by divers chances, the remaining three nuns also entered the partnership. Last of all, the abbess, still witting not of these doings, happened one very hot day, as she walked by herself through the garden, to find Maceto, who now rode so much by night that he could stand very little fatigue by day. Stretched out at full length asleep under the shade of an almond tree, his person quite exposed in the front by reason that the wind had disarranged his clothes. Which the lady observing, and knowing that she was alone, fell a prey to the same appetite to which her nuns had yielded. She aroused Maceto, and took him with her to her chamber, where for some days, though the nuns loudly complained that the gardener no longer came to work in the kitchen garden, she kept him, tasting and retasting the sweetness of that indulgence which she was wont to be the first to censure in others. And when at last she had sent him back from her chamber to his room, she must needs send for him again, and make such exorbitant demands upon him that Maceto, not being able to satisfy so many women, bethought him that his part of mute, should he persist in it, might entail disastrous consequences. So one night, when he was with the abbess, he cut the tongue-string, and thus broke silence. "Madam, I have understood that a cock may very well serve 10 hens, but that 10 men are sorely tasked to satisfy a single woman, and here I am expected to serve 9, a burden quite beyond my power to bear. Nay, by what have I already undergone, I am now so much reduced that my strength is quite spent. Wherefore either bid me Godspeed, or find some means to make matters tolerable." Wonderstruck to hear the supposed mute thus speak, the lady exclaimed, "What means this? I took thee to be dumb." "And in sooth, madam, so was I," said Maceto, "not indeed from my birth, but through an illness which took from me the power of speech, which only this very night I have recovered, and so I praise God with all my heart." The lady believed him, and asked him what he meant by saying that he had 9 to serve. Maceto told her how things stood, whereby she perceived that of all her nuns there was not any but was much wiser than she. And lest, if Maceto were sent away, he should give the convent a bad name, she discreetly determined to arrange matters with the nuns in such sort that he might remain there. So, the steward having died within the last few days, she assembled all the nuns, and their and her own past errors being fully avowed, they by common consent, and with Maceto's concurrence, resolved that the neighbors should be given to understand that by their prayers and the merits of their patron saint, Maceto, long mute, had recovered the powers of speech, after which they made him steward, and so ordered matters among themselves that he was able to endure the burden of their service. In the course of which, though he procreated not a few little monastics, yet 'twas all managed so discreetly that no breath of scandal stirred, until after the abbess's death, by which time Maceto was advanced in years, and minded to return home with the wealth he had gotten, which he was suffered to do as soon as he made his desire known. And so Maceto, who had left Lamporecchio with a hatchet on his shoulder, returned thither in his old age, and a father, having by the wisdom with which he employed his youth spared himself the pains and expense of rearing children, and averring that such was the measure that Christ meted out to the man that set horns on his cap. End of Day 3, the first story.
Day 3, the second story of the Decameron. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tonight's recording by Miette. The Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, translated by J.M. Rigg. Day 3, the second story. A groom lies with the wife of King Agilulf, who learns the fact, keeps his own counsel, finds out the groom and shears him. The shorn shears all his fellows, and so comes safe out of the scrape.
Philostratos' story, which the ladies had received now with blushes, now with laughter, being ended, the queen bade Pampinea to follow suit, which behest Pampinea smilingly obeyed, and thus began.
Some there are whose indiscretion is such that they must needs evince that they are fully cognizant of that which it were best they should not know, and, censuring the covert misdeeds of others, augment beyond measure the disgrace which they would fain diminish. The truth whereof, fair ladies, I mean to shew you in the contrary case, wherein appears the astuteness of one that held, perhaps, an even lower place than would have been Massetto's in the esteem of a doughty king. Agilulf, king of the Lombards, who, like his predecessors, made the city of Pavia in Lombardy the seat of his government, took to wife Theodelinda, the widow of Orthori, likewise king of the Lombards, a lady very fair, wise, and virtuous, but who was unfortunate in her lover. For while the Lombards prospered in peace under the wise and firm rule of King Agilulf, it so befell that one of the queen's grooms, a man born to very low estate, but in native worth far above his mean office, and moreover not a whit less tall and goodly of person than the king, became inordinately enamoured of her. And as for all his base condition, he had sense enough to recognize that his love was in the last degree presumptuous. He disclosed it to none. Nay, he did not even venture to tell her the tale by the mute eloquence of his eyes. And albeit he lived without hope that he should ever be able to win her favour, yet he inwardly gloried that he had fixed his affections in so high a place, and being all aflame with passion, he shewed himself zealous beyond any of his comrades to do whatever he thought was likely to please the queen. Whereby it came about that, when the queen had to take horse, she would mount the palfrey that he groomed rather than any other, and when she did so, he deemed himself most highly favoured, and never quitted her stirrup, esteeming himself happy if he might but touch her clothes. But, as 'tis frequently observed that love waxes as hope wanes, so was it with this poor groom, insomuch that the burden of this great hidden passion, alleviated by no hope, was most grievous to bear, and from time to time, not being able to shake it off, he proposed to die, and meditating on the mode, he was minded that it should be of a kind to make it manifest that he died for the love which he had borne and bore to the queen, and also to afford him an opportunity of trying his fortune whether his desire might in whole or in part be gratified. He had no thought of speaking to the queen, nor yet of declaring his love to her by letter, for he knew that would be in vain either to speak or to write. But he resolved to try to devise some means whereby he might lie with the queen, which end might in no other way be compassed than by contriving to get access to her in her bedroom, which could only be by passing himself off as the king, who, as he knew, did not always lie with her. Wherefore, that he might observe the carriage and dress of the king, he passed to her room. He contrived to conceal himself for several nights in a great hall of the king's palace, which separated the king's room from that of the queen, and on one of these nights he saw the king issue from his room, wrapped in a great mantle, with a lighted torch in one hand and a wand in the other, and cross the hall, and, saying nothing, tap the door of the queen's room with the wand once or twice, whereupon the door was at once opened, and the torch taken from his hand. Having observed the king thus go and return, and being bent on doing likewise, he found means to come by a mantle like that which he had seen the king wear, and also a torch and a wand. He then took a warm bath, and, having thoroughly cleansed himself, that the smell of the foul straw might not offend the lady, or discover to her the deceit, he in this guise concealed himself, as he was wont in the great hall. He waited only until all were asleep, and then, deeming the time come to accomplish his purpose, or by his presumption clear away to the death which he coveted, he struck a light with the flint and steel which he had brought with him, and having kindled his torch and wrapped himself close in his mantle, he went to the door of the queen's room, and tapped on it twice with his wand. The door was opened by a very drowsy chambermaid, who took the torch and put it out of sight, whereupon without a word he passed within the curtain, laid aside the mantle, and got into bed, where the queen lay asleep. Then, taking her in his arms and straining her to him with ardour, making as if he were moody, because he knew that, when the king was in such a frame, he would never hear aught in such wise without word said either on his part or hers, he had more than once carnal cognizance of the queen. Loath indeed was he to leave her, but, fearing lest by too long tarrying his achieved delight might be converted into woe, he rose, resumed the mantle and the light, and leaving the room without a word, returned with all speed to his bed. He was hardly there when the king got up and entered the queen's room, whereat she wondered not a little, but reassured by the gladsome greeting which he gave her, as he got into bed, she said, "My lord, what a surprise is this to-night! 'Twas but now you left me after an unwonted measure of enjoyment, and do you now return so soon? Consider what you do." From these words, the king at once inferred that the queen had been deceived by someone that had counterfeited his person and carriage, but, at the same time bethinking himself that, as neither the queen nor any other had detected the cheat, 'twas best to leave her in ignorance. He wisely kept silence, which many a fool would not have done, but would have said, "Nay, 'twas not I that was here. Who was it that was here? How came it to pass? Who came hither?" Whereby in the sequel he might have caused the lady needless chagrin, and given her occasion to desire another such experience as she had had, and so have brought disgrace upon himself by uttering that from which unuttered no shame could have resulted. Wherefore, betraying little, either by his mien or by his words, of the disquietude which he felt, the king replied, "Madam, seem I such to you, that you cannot suppose that I should have been with you once and returned to you immediately afterwards?" "Nay, not so, my lord," returned the lady, "but none the less I pray you to look for your health." Then said the king, "And I am minded to take your advice, wherefore, without giving you further trouble, I will leave you." So, angered and incensed beyond measure by the trick which he saw had been played upon him, he resumed his mantle and quitted the room with the intention of privily detecting the offender, deeming that he must belong to the palace, and that, whoever he may be, he could not have quitted it. So, taking with him a small lantern, which showed only a glimmer of light, he went into the dormitory, which was over the palace stables, and which was of great length, insomuch that well nigh all the men servants slept there in divers beds, and arguing that, by whomsoever that of which the queen spoke was done, his heart and pulse could not after such a strain as yet have ceased to throb. He began cautiously with one of the head grooms, and so went from bed to bed, feeling at the heart of each man to see if it was thumping. All were asleep, save only he that had been with the queen, who, seeing the king come and guessing what he sought to discover, began to be mightily afraid, insomuch that to the agitation which his late exertion had communicated to his heart, terror now added one yet more violent. Nor did he doubt that, should the king perceive it, he would kill him. Diverse alternatives of action thronged his mind, but at last, observing that the king was unarmed, he resolved to make as if he were asleep, and wait to see what the king would do. So, having tried many and found none that he deemed the culprit, the king came at last to the culprit himself, and, marking the thumping of his heart, said to himself, "This is he." But, being minded to afford no clue to his ulterior purpose, he did no more than with the pair of scissors which he had brought with him shear away on one side of the man's head a portion of his locks, which, as was then the fashion, he wore very long, that by this token he might recognize him on the morrow, and having done so, he departed and returned to his room. The groom, who was fully sensible of what the king had done, and being a shrewd fellow, understood very well to what end he was so marked, got up without a moment's delay, and having found a pair of scissors, for as it chanced there were several pairs there belonging to the stables for use in grooming the horses, he went quietly through the dormitory, and in like manner sheared the locks of each of the sleepers just above the ear, which done without disturbing any, he went back to bed. On the morrow, as soon as the king was risen, and before the gates of the palace were opened, he summoned all his men-servants to his presence, and, as they stood bareheaded before him, scanned them closely to see whether the one whom he had sheared was there, and observing with surprise that the more part of them were all sheared in the same manner, said to himself, "Of a surety this fellow, whom I go about to detect, evinces for all his base condition a high degree of sense." Then, recognizing that he could not compass his end without causing a bruit, and not being minded to brave so great a dishonour in order to be avenged upon so petty an offender, he was content by a single word of admonition, to shew him that his offence had not escaped notice. Wherefore, turning to them all, he said, "He that did it, let him do it no more, and get you hence in God's peace." Another would have put them to the strappado, the question, the torture, and thereby have brought to light that which one should rather be sedulous to cloak, and having brought it to light, would, however, complete the retribution which he exacted, having not lessened but vastly augmented his disgrace and sullied the fair fame of his lady. Those who heard the king's parting admonition wondered, and made much question with one another what the king might have meant to convey by it. But 'twas understood by none but him to whom it referred, who was discreet enough never to reveal the secret as long as the king lived, or again to stake his life on such a venture. End of Day 3, the second story. Recording by Miette of Miette's Bedtime Story Podcast.